This weekend, Makhmud Muradov finally gets a striker. And finally, Bryan Barberena gets a striker. And for Bryan Barberena, bam, bam. He's won 5 Fight of the Nights in the UFC. He's competed from lightweight to welterweight to now middleweight. This is Barberena's first fight at middleweight since his King of the Cage spin back in 2010. So for Barberena, a big step up in that respect. And for Muradov, again, I make sense of the fact that these guys took on grapplers recently, because for Muradov, he has the Gerald Meerschaert fight, and he's more than a 5-1 favorite in that one. Punches himself out in the first round. Second round, he gets submitted. His last time out against Caio Borralho, Muradov wrestled against Caio Borralho in the second round and in the third round. He had a great reversal. He was on his back and he swept Borralho and got on top in that second round. So for Muradov, he showed growth in his game his last time out. The prospect out of Ankos MMA. It's hard to say prospect when you've had 33 pro fights and you're 33 years old. But for Muradov, it's kind of been not necessarily realized. He had a couple of performance bonuses on the way up through. He beat Andrew Sanchez, and listen, that wasn't wrestling Sanchez. That was, listen, I'm
gonna play around on the outside. Yeah.
So yeah, the former Ultimate Fighter winner Sanchez. But for Muradov, you know how crystal boxing is, and you know how good he can move on the balls of his feet on the outside. And now he gets a striker just like that in Bryan Barberena. A tricky southpaw. That awesome fight against Robbie Lawler. An awesome fight against Matt Brown. I can go through all those Fight of the Nights that he had.
What about Sage Northcutt, Craig?
But for Bryan Barberena, I mean, they call him the Ellenberger killer just in Nebraska. Oh. But if you look at it, Barberena debuted at lightweight against Joe Ellenberger, finished him in the third round, an awesome win there for him. But it's just been such an interesting career progression. And for Bryan Barberena's last time out, it was in London. He was wearing the overalls with his wife walking around town. And then he went in there against Gunnar Nelson and looked like he never grappled a day in his life, which is sad.
Gunnar Nelson's pretty sick.
For Barberena, training out of Gym O, that's one of the best grappling camps you're going to be a feature of in the UFC.
It definitely is. I still don't know if that can make up for the lifetime of knowledge that Gunnar Nelson has on the mat. I know Gunnar hasn't had the greatest run as of late, but I think everybody does realize.
No, it's been good lately.
If that guy gets you to the mat, though, his jiu-jitsu is not one of one, but it is very high level. I know Leon Edwards was able to get out of some bad positions, but that's Leon Edwards. What I will say is, I like watching Bryan Barberena fight, and I like watching Makhmud Muradov fight. I'm very excited for this matchup, and I can't hide it at all, because, again, I like watching both guys compete, not like I'm rooting for either one of them, but Bryan Barberena has that dog in him, and that's a term that Craig has very much come around on in the last year and a half. I vividly remember you just hating it all the time.
I might make jokes about it when the camera's off. I hate it.
Bryan Barberena definitely has whatever that dog is in him, though. When the fight gets tough, that's when Bryan Barberena tends to succeed. And I liken him a little bit to like a smaller version of Forrest Griffin. Remember when Forrest Griffin would go out there, throw a lot of really nice combinations, be a very well-rounded mixed martial artist, but the fight didn't really start until a little bit of blood was shown. And for Barberena, that really has been his style as of late. Now, I know Gunnar Nelson, that fight didn't really go far enough to see the blood, but you get how Bryan Barberena likes to go about his business. My curiosity is, how does Makhmud Muradov deal with the kicks of Bryan Barberena? Because Barberena's the guy who does get a lot of work done with his hands, don't get me wrong, but I've always felt like his kicks have been an underrated part of his game, and if he is able to use those kicks, Makhmud Muradov's the bigger guy in this matchup. You bring up the weight classes and how Bryan Barberena is a former lightweight. I'm very interested to see how he looks at 185, but for Muradov, if he's not able to get past some of those kicks, not that I think he can't win this fight, but it does make his job quite a bit more difficult.
I think Muradov wrestles in this matchup, and we've seen Muradov wrestle all the way up through.
Do you think he just starts wrestling, or does he ease into it after?
I think he'll ease into it, and I don't necessarily see it being kind of like a pendulum swing where Barberena's having all the success in the world with the striking. Now all of a sudden Muradov, between rounds, we're lacing up the wrestling shoes like he's Mark Coleman. I think Muradov, I mean, you look at the gym that he trains out of. It's Ankos MMA. There's an Ankos guy who's one half of the main event coming up in Marcin Tybura. You look at Carlos Vamola. What the is that guy doing with his body? Because he is cut up and orange. Carlos Vamola, post UFC.
A one of one.
Holy sweet that guy's got it going on. But for Muradov, training with those bigger guys to get ready for a matchup like this, I think that's a lot of success. Already just kind of money in the bank for him. But when you look at it for Barberena, I say this every single Barberena fight. You train at Gym O. Who's the main guy? John Salter. And then you go down through the list of everybody. I'm so excited. Who can
it's a great fight.
And grapple. Joe Selecki. Impic Sanganai's been there for a long time. You just continue to go down through the list. And Barberena has equal amounts of training partners to that of Makhmud Muradov. Now, Last weekend, you had a main event with Holly Holm and Maeda Bueno Silva. Why do I say that? Holly Holm, former bantamweight champ, 1.5 million Instagram followers. That's why she's in a main event. Makhmud Muradov, 2 million Instagram followers.
Floyd Mayweather says that's the guy.
And Floyd Mayweather, Team Money, or the Money Team. But yeah, you don't really see Floyd.
Not as much as he did on the way into the UFC.
No. So, Matt, when it does come down to this one, Muradov is heavily favored, though his striking game is very boxing-oriented with not a ton of kicks. His cardio normally is quite good, but you saw it tested against Gerald Meerschaert where he went for the finish and blew that load. If we have a look at the topology votes in this one, Matt, surprise to us there to you. I think they're going to be closer than the odds would suggest.
I don't know. I think Muradov's going to be in like the 90th percentile.
I'm going to say under on that one. And it is under, so 817 total votes, 85% Muradov, 64% by knockout for the 15% that are Barberena, 43% by decision, 47% by knockout. And I think Makhmud Muradov wins this fight. I think he's really rounded his game out as just the wrestler to where he is today. So for me, I do like Muradov in this one. Big fighter, pressure fighter. But if you look at Barberena, go back to his fight of the night against Jason Witt. Wrestling ain't and look at what Barberena was able to do in that one. Matt, I've got a lot of bleeps to throw in this video.
I have a difficult time with this fight because I really do think Bryan Barberena is going to make a much better account of himself than the odds would suggest. Because for Muradov, when the going gets tough, he does start to just kind of accentuate the things he does well. He'll just try to knock you out with one punch if you really are in his face. And for Bryan Barberena, I do think his style of just being gritty on the outside is going to give him some success to where maybe this is a fight where Barberena loses, but you feel a lot better
like the
about
Luke
him at
fight.
185. Yeah, a little bit. So I do have Muradov in the matchup. I think your point about the wrestling is a very good one to bring up because Barberena has been taken down so many times that Muradov's camp's probably just looking at that quite a bit and really trying to go after it. So I have Muradov, but I do think he's going to have enough success on the feet to where we're not going to see the wrestling until later in the fight.
A UFC fight week with Carlos Vamola is a fight week that I'm excited for. 54% wrestling defense or takedown defense for Barberena in the UFC. Both of us going with Uzbekistan's Makhmud Muradov to get the win in the matchup. Some big time fights on this card. Tom Aspinall's taking on Marcin Tybura in that main event. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.